An early Christmas present from the Bank of England, another cut in interest rates. So, will it be a happy new year? Hello, I'm Alex Forsyth and welcome to Politics Live. Joining me today, the Labour peer Aisha Hazarika, the Conservative peer Stuart Jackson and the broadcaster Kay Burley. I'll be getting their thoughts on a momentous year in politics and looking ahead to 2026. Also today,
parents, please, get off those phones. Get off those phones at meal times.
Parents are being urged to lead by example and make this a phone-free Christmas. Will you be switching off your mobile?
Overarchingly, the point is that the government recognises this as a national emergency and will use every lever of the state to intervene.
The government wants to halve violence against women and girls. Could anti-misogyny classes for young boys be the answer? And we want to hear from you. If you have thoughts on those stories or questions for our panel, we want to hear your voice. You can get in touch using the details on the screen now. We look forward to hearing from you. Hello. So we're going to start with a decision that's been announced in the last 15 minutes or so from the Bank of England, the decision regarding interest rates. And the news is that interest rates have been cut from 4% to 3.75%. That means the cost of borrowing is the lowest that it's been for around 3 years. And obviously that follows the fall in inflation that we had yesterday. That decision was made by the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. That's the committee that decides these kind of things. And they voted 5-4 in favour of that cut to interest rates. So, Kay Burley, is this good news?
Well, of course, it's fantastic news, isn't it? But I'm not an economist, so we'll start from that premise. But I am a mum, and I've noticed how, if I go to the supermarket or whatever, things are much more expensive. If inflation is cut, it doesn't mean that that's particularly... what it actually means is that prices don't go up as much.
Still rising, just rising more
slowly.
slowly.
I told you I wasn't an economist. So, yeah, they just aren't going up as quickly. It's great that interest rates are going down. It'd be interesting to see what happens as far as the banks are concerned and whether they bring mortgages down.
Aisha, do you think that the government can, or at least might attempt to take some credit for this?
Well, look, I mean, this is good news. And of course, if interest rates were going up, we'd all be giving the government a massive kicking right now. Of course, the rates are set by the government, by the Bank of England. But this is good news because mortgage costs have been absolutely crippling for people ever since the mini budget, and we want to try and see those things come down. So it's very good that we're seeing inflation starting to come down and we're seeing interest rates starting to come down. But we also have to be honest, it's really tough for people out there. The cost of living is very high, as Kay said. I mean, just the weekly shopping, your food bill is going up. But it is good that this is happening, and I think it will provide a lot of relief for people.
I guess it's always that thing, isn't it, as to whether people are really feeling it. The numbers are one thing.
Absolutely.
But it's whether or not it actually starts to make a difference in people's day-to-day.
Perception's reality, as they say.
But I think, lots of people who will be coming up to remortgage will think this is very, very good news, and it will materially affect them, because just think of the number of people whose mortgages absolutely shot up after the mini budget. That made a big difference to their lives.
Stuart Jackson, if you are
I was just going to say, it depends whether the banks actually follow through, because...
Well, already I've seen that the banks are already issuing mortgage products with lower mortgage
That's
rates.
right, because of course the Bank of England sets the central rate of interest.
Yeah, as of today.
But then it is what banks do with their individual mortgage products.
Good.
Stuart Jackson, I mean, if you are a homeowner, if you are a borrower, you must be looking at this and thinking, phew, thank goodness they're coming down.
Well, yes, but the wider context is that growth is flatlining, inflation is beyond its normal range of 2%, which is what the Bank of England aims for. Youth unemployment is rising. It's the highest in the G7. We've seen a massive increase in the tax take on ordinary working families. In fact, ordinary working families are paying for an expansion of the welfare system. And generally, it's quite a bleak outlook there. And it's not helped, obviously, by the employment bill that's been passed, will become the Employment Act, which imposes huge new burdens on the workforce workforce and on employers, and will prevent them from taking a chance on some young people coming into the employment market. So yes, on its face it's good, but the wider picture is a lot more grim, and underlining that, of course, is a huge expansion in debt in this country, which the bond markets are noticing. So yes, it gives breathing space to Rachel Reeves, but not much.
I just think it is important when there are, some signs of good news that we should be I'm been pretty critical about things that this government have done. Let's not forget that inflation absolutely shot up under the last administration. Interest rates shot up as well. Of course, we're in a very difficult economic climate, but I just think in all different parties, when there is some good news, it is important to recognise it.
We are going to talk a bit more about perhaps what the next year involves, but I want to move on to a story that's in today's news for now. And take a look at this headline there on the BBC News app. I think we can see it. It says, parents told to lead by example and turn off their phones this Christmas. This is a plea, really, from the Children's Commissioner for England, Dame Rachel de Souza. And we can take a listen to what she's asking parents to do this Christmas.
My thing is to encourage us to check our own behaviour as adults. And sometimes, we think the kids will be bored. They actually love it. They want the phone-free time. They don't want the phones there at Christmas dinner. They want to have the silly conversations, go for the walk with Dad, play the silly games, be a bit bored, and just be with you. So parents, please, get off those phones, at meal times.
Dame Rachel de Souza with a bit of a plea for parents. Kay, what do you make of it?
Well, I've got my phone here with me, so I just pop that down to
Could you imagine even the notion of parking it for Christmas?
No, I couldn't. But we do have times in our house where we don't use our phones. And on Friday nights, we all go out as a family for dinner. And the phones go on the middle of the table. And the first person to look at the phone pays the bill. So that's one way we try to make sure that we don't use it.
Is there a person that usually ends up...
Yeah, it's my son normally. But that's one way of trying not to. I completely agree with what she's saying, but it has to be a habit. You can't just say, oh, we're going to do this for Christmas and then see what happens on the 1st of January. Yes, it's a good idea. Will it make sense to kids who want to see what their mates are doing or what toys they've got or whatever? I'm not so sure.
Stuart?
I totally agree with her. I went to a presentation about 18 months ago by Jonathan Haidt, who's written this book, The Anxious Generation, about the addiction of younger people, teenagers and younger children to the digital economy. And I have to say, it really did worry me that we are rewiring these youngsters' brains to be constantly looking at phones. And it's very sad when you go into a restaurant and you see a little toddler in a buggy with a little mini baby iPad just dumped there by the parents, and then the parents on their phones. It's not good. And I do think that we ought to look at the example of Australia. The Australians, they're not doing everything right, but they really are doing a good thing by banning phones. Some schools have already started in the UK of forcing the kids to leave the phones in lockers, but the Australians are banning the use of social media by under 16s, and I think this government has to do the same. It's a cross-party political issue. Yeah. It's about the health, the mental health particularly, of children and young people.
I mean, that ban on social media for under 16s in Australia came into force last week. We've actually had someone get in touch with us from Australia, Ian in Canberra. He said, regarding the social media ban, it beggars belief that parents are not held accountable. Parents provide these devices, not the social media companies. Aisha, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the Children's Commissioner is almost highlighting the role of parental responsibility in this. We often talk about the social media companies, we often talk about schools, we often talk about the role of government, but what about the role of parents? Is she right to be saying, come on, parents, you've got to do something about this, lead by example?
She is, but it's like a lot of the very difficult problems we have to crack in society. We're going to come on and talk about violence against women and girls in a moment. These are things which we have to do collectively as parents, as schools, educators, and of course social media companies, and all of us have a responsibility. And I couldn't agree more with what Stuart says. He's absolutely correct in everything he's said there. I think we will actually look back on this period of time since we all accessed mobile phones and all had unfettered access to the internet, and I think we'll look back with real shame and horror at this period of time. I think it will be looking back at kind of how the tobacco industry damaged people, the damage that has been done to young people through unfettered access. Again, we're going to come on and talk about pornography. Often these devices are a gateway from a really young age. And as Stuart says, it does shape people's minds in quite a nefarious way, getting access to this stuff so young.
Do you agree with that,
No,
Kay?
I don't. I agree that people being so young and the issues that it might cause. But I think as parents have got a huge responsibility here. You make sure that your kids can have access to their phones for a certain amount of time. You also monitor what they're looking at on their social media. But when I was a kid, we didn't have a phone at home. You have to go to the phone box to dial a friend and hope that they might be in. When I started off at Sky News, we didn't have the internet. So when Diana died, there was no internet to check details that I might have wanted to share with our viewers. So let's not criticise the internet. Let's criticise the way that it's being used and being allowed to be used by some parents who don't monitor their kids.
It is about parental responsibility. I mean, I had a battle royal with my own daughter because I wouldn't allow her to have a phone until she was 11. And there were kids...
her peers had phones at
and
that
her
age.
peers had phones at 9 and 10, and it really was very difficult. But we did say, look, you can't have a phone because it's not healthy. And I do think Kay's right. There needs to be a balance between the state helping parents to make wise decisions with their children, but ultimately it's about your family, your children, and what's good for them. And therefore, parental responsibility is important.
I think, of course, parental responsibility is important, but I think we also just have to be realistic about how rapacious these algorithms are, right? There's a group of campaigners. They got a clean phone, a fresh phone, a new phone. They basically got, like, I think they set a profile up to be like a 13-year-old boy, and within a very short amount of time, pretty hardcore pornography. And not that this boy had even sought it out. So I think absolutely parents, but don't underestimate how, kind of aggressive these algorithms can be.
I just wonder, Stuart, on when you said the Australia social media ban, which is a total ban, and, there are some people that say, look, young people are still going to find ways around this ban, or in actual fact, young people should be exposed to social media so they learn how to manage it. But you're saying you think there should be a total ban here on social
I really
media,
do, because
something akin to Australia.
I think, Alex, the problem is now that, and it's not too much of a caricature, but young people are losing the capacity to pick up a phone and have a conversation, to write things down, to write letters, to converse with their peers and older people. And they need to do that to socialise in the workplace. If they're constantly on the phone, the mobile phone, for 4, 5, 6 hours a day or more in their bedroom, they're losing those social skills, societal skills. So I do think there is a case. Let's at least maybe not have a royal commission, but look into the empirical evidence of whether this might work. And obviously we'll be looking at seeing what happens in Australia.
And on that, Kay, because we're talking about the role of parents, that would be a significant step from the government. It would be the government effectively telling people under 16 when it comes to their social media and their parents what they can and can't do.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what you think about that. But as far as I'm concerned, it all comes back down to parental responsibility. And I'm sure that kids will be getting around, in Australia as we speak, getting around that ban. You don't let your kids be on the phone for 6 hours a day. You don't let your children have their phone in their bedrooms. My son never had a computer terminal in his bedroom. He wasn't allowed to do that. And periodically monitoring what they have on their phones, I think, probably is a sensible halfway house.
All right, let's stay with the theme, but look at another story, something that you mentioned, Aisha, a story today about the government's violence against women and girls strategy. So the government's made a pledge to halve violence against women and girls. And as part of this, there have been a series of announcements this week about the way that they plan to do it. The one that's the focus of today is here on the BBC News app. Boys to be sent on courses to tackle misogyny in schools. So this is the notion there should be training for teachers in schools about how to address issues around misogyny, but also for some pupils they could be sent on specialist courses. To talk about all of this, we can welcome to the studio Michael Conroy, who used to be a secondary school teacher in England for 16 years, but now trains professionals, including teachers, to support boys and young men. Michael, thank you for coming here.
Thanks for having me.
And having this discussion. Before we get into the policy detail or the government's response, I wonder if you can just really outline to people what you see the issue is, what you're seeing out there that's happening with young people.
OK. The footprint of porn is everywhere and immense and life-changing. the constant connectivity to algorithms, which I think you were alluding to earlier, and the fact that algorithms are really bespoke. If a 15-year-old boy and a 15-year-old girl were sat next to each other on the same phone, they would be getting different worldviews, different messages about who they are and what they're worth, etc.
And a lot of the messages that boys and young men are getting, are they misogynistic?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, because that is linked in with what is easily monetised, and it's the clickability and the feeling of being validated. You know, the guy with sunglasses and the cigar who spends a lot of time in Romania. I've named him so many times over the years. I don't want to talk about it anymore. However, culturally sort of significant in a way, because even recently, like last week, I was working with primary school teachers who say that 9, 10-year-old boys are talking about him. So I find that...
You're talking about a big social media influencer.
Yeah, absolutely.
For those of you who can't read between the lines, it's Andrew Tate you're referring to.
Yeah.
Not the only one that's out there,
No,
actually,
not at all. And I think Andrew Tate has benefited from the abandonment of us collectively, of our children, to the gods of the internet. I don't think there's anything particularly compelling about him or his message. It's ancient stuff.
Are you seeing this stuff changing the behaviour of young boys? And if so, what's the impact on girls and women?
Absolutely. And the work that I do, hopefully, is addressing both. It's about what is the world offering boys to be, what are the models it's offering them, what is it, the aspirations it's offering them and prioritising for them, and what is the connection, therefore, with their well-being and the well-being of women and girls. I would see that they are really inextricably linked, because if we're telling boys you've got to be the top dog, get the last word, have all the money, be the boss, etc., of who? You know, if the majority of the young men are heterosexual, they're going to have female partners. Therefore, those values really sit uncomfortably in what should be an egalitarian relationship.
So the strategy the government's outlining today, which is focused, this element of it really is focused on what's taught in the classroom and the values that people grow up with. So pupils are going to be taught about issues like consent, the dangers of sharing intimate images, how to identify positive role models. But for high-risk students, as they're termed, they could be sent for extra classes or courses.
Yeah.
You're talking about secondary school pupils, so potentially boys as young as 11. Do you think that's the right approach?
I don't have much optimism about this strategy, to be honest, for all kinds of reasons. I think a lot of key people were shut out of the process. A lot of women campaigners who I know are just not part of the instrumental in it, unfortunately. I think we are at risk of using really difficult language. There was an article recently in the BBC saying boys will be targeted. Now, that is political kryptonite.
You mean the notion of targeting
Targeting is used
boys?
for problems, not people. We should be targeting the digital ecosphere that they are being exploited by. We should be targeting the platforms that make billions and our politicians are timid towards. That's what and who we should be targeting. We should be supporting boys to navigate that space, which is historically new, where you grow up in a space where a lot of your life is lived not in the physical 3 dimensions, to quote Aaron Paul from Radio London, 3D life. That's a new space. We've never been in that historically, and I don't think we are really appreciating the magnitude of the impact of it on the development of neural pathways, about the reward thing, and about porn being in the life of all our boys, unfortunately. So when I hear 20 million quid, there are 3.5...
That's the funding for this element of this strategy.
There are 3,620 secondary schools in England and Wales. The maths are not very encouraging there.
Stay there, Michael, if you will. So, of course, this is one element of this broader violence against women and girls strategy. Some of the other aspects the government's already announced are things like NHS support for child and adult survivors of abuse, specialist investigators of every police force to oversee rape and sexual offences cases. But just focusing on this issue that Michael has outlined there, Aisha, you've heard his scepticism about how much impact this element of the strategy, this focus on what happens in the classroom, could really have.
Well, first of all, it's really great to have Michael in the studio. I followed the work that you and I have sort of been in touch over the years, and I've followed the work that Michael has done. And honestly, he's brilliant, and he's really been occupying this space. And I think what is important about this strategy, and I accept this is not going to be the panacea that solves everything, because as we were just, in fact, the two topics we've been discussing actually intersect really, really well, because so much of what we've been talking about in terms of children's access to phones is actually access to pornography. That's really what the nub of it is. And I just think what's really important about this conversation is actually inviting young men and boys into the space, because I think for quite a long time it has just been women talking to other women about something must be done. It's really terrible. I know in the Lords we've had very good debates about violence against women, and lots of male peers have taken part, but essentially it's been women talking to women about this. You're never going to change things if you don't invite young men and boys and dads and, you know, all that cultural change that we're talking about. And the intersection of porn with misogyny against women, and particularly young girls, there was an organisation called Everyone's Invited, which was looking at what was happening in universities, further education colleges, schools, and even primary schools. And the level of sexual abuse, and even in primary schools, we're starting to see. And there's a very, just my final point on this is, there was a really good intervention by a young TV star called Ori Uduba. He won Strictly Come Dancing a few years ago. He did a really brave thing where he spoke out a couple of weeks ago about his own addiction to online pornography and the absolute damage it had done to his life and how he perceived, you know, his mental health. And until we got to get men into this conversation to change things.
We can see, actually, Jess Phillips, who is the Home Office Minister, the Minister with responsibility for safeguarding and with responsibility for violence against women and girls, on her feet in the Commons talking about this strategy right now. Kate, I mean, just one statistic. You've heard the examples that Aisha and Michael have introduced, but one statistic, nearly 40% of teenagers in relationships are victims of abuse. That's from the domestic abuse charity Reducing the Risk. I mean, it feels like if that's the sort of statistics that we're talking about, the sort of scale of this issue, it's clearly something needs to be done, but is this the right thing?
I don't know if it's the right thing. Anything is a good thing to do, but if we're going to invest in young men with this sort of example, you talked about 20 million quid. It's actually 16 million. They're looking to get 4 million from other organisations.
Calling it an innovation fund for philanthropists and other partners.
It's a drop in the bucket. You'll know, won't you, Aisha, how far that sort of money can go. I was looking at some statistics this morning, and police chiefs are saying that 1 million incidents were reported, accounting for 20% of all police recorded crime is violence against women. It is an absolute epidemic. We need to do something about it. Do we fix it in schools? Certainly it has its part to play. But again, I'm going to come back to, I'm the mother of a boy. It comes back to parenting, and it comes back to boys being told how to react to girls and to women. And it's about respect.
Within the family.
Within the family, exactly that.
Stuart?
Well, I think Michael's touched on a really interesting issue, which is society's attitudes to young men. And I think, you know, women have made great strides socially, economically, politically over the last 30 or 40 years. But we're in a more feminised post-industrial world where young men in particular are struggling. I mean, male suicide amongst young men has risen significantly. The post-industrial world means that the bonding of men and the way they treated women in terms of the factory, the rugby club, the working men's club has gone. So they're, in some respects, some of those young men who lack role models, male role models, because of the breakdown of family, for instance, and the breakdown of our faith, frankly, they are lacking that, and therefore they're in a difficult position. So that's the wider context, I think. And so we need to think of it in that respect. But it does come back to the family, as well as government helping. I don't think the Andrew Tate thing is the only thing, and we'd be wrong for fixating on, you know, how many lads are watching him and being abusive or, you know, discriminatory against women. It's a much bigger issue. I have to say also, you know, there are communities in this country which are inherently more misogynist than others. You know, we do have Sharia law, we do have arranged marriages, we do have genital female mutilation, for instance. These are things which, within the wider context, we also need to look at.
I just want to come back on that point.
Aisha.
As somebody from a Muslim background, my parents had an arranged marriage. I think there are bad things that happen in every community. Of course, we've had the terrible Pakistani grooming gangs, and I've spoken out in Parliament, as you know, about that. I just think we absolutely have to look at cultural factors within different cultures, of course, but let's not kid ourselves. Even before there was immigration to this country, there was horrific violence against women.
Violence.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
We've had a situation where Jeffrey Epstein, one of the richest men in the world, has been a mass industrial sex abuser of women, with some of the most powerful men around him. So I'm a Muslim, and I do not shy away from the cultural issues that go on. But I think that is sometimes quite an easy way to. We have to look at this across the piece, because, as Michael will tell you, something very dark is stirring right now in our society.
Let's just have a little listen to Jess Phillips, the Home Office Minister. She's been on her feet in the House of Commons talking about this, and we can hear some of what she's had to say.
This strategy is designed to deliver 3 goals. Firstly, preventing boys and men from ever becoming abusers in the first place. Secondly, bearing down on perpetrators so those who have offended do not do so again. And finally, supporting victims so that they get justice when they seek it and the closure that they deserve.
Jess Phillips, the Home Office Minister, just in the last few minutes discussing this in the House of Commons. Michael, we've been talking about, and Jess Phillips has been talking about today, the role of schools in this. What about the responsibility that, therefore, is putting on teachers, some of whom might, because you're a former teacher yourself, some of whom might already say, we've got quite a lot to contend with here?
They have, and the current structure in schools is really problematic. For example, the PSHE lessons.
That's personal, social and health education, is that right?
Sorry, yes, I'm in acronym land, yeah. And sex ed more broadly as well, and citizenship, is that they're delivered by well-intentioned but unqualified, non-specialists, people who teach French, maths, geography, PE. It's not a slight on them, it's just that is a strange delivery mechanism. Also, a lot of those teachers are predominant are women. And some number of them are victim survivors of the things they're being asked to talk about. But that is an interesting thread that is never talked about. Who are the people we are putting this pressure upon to deliver these very small fragments of an hour here and an hour there of really life-changing and life-impacting stuff? So my work is to train teachers, essentially, because I came from secondary, and about 2015 we started seeing things that were being brought through the school gates that we weren't ready for. One thing I picked up on the tail end of your conversation about phones is that I think the word phone is a bit of an issue. They're computers. And I think the mobile phone somehow softens our understanding of its power. It's not a connector, it's a separator. And essentially, when the kids are on these phones for so long, they're not really ringing people up, having a chat. They're doing other things that are largely detrimental to their physical and emotional well-being. So I bang a drum about, let's call them computers. That was one thing.
And so would you like to see, because, a lot of schools at the moment, just on the mobile phone specific point, a lot of schools and head teachers at the moment, they enforce bans or they put the phones away at the start of the school day, but there isn't a government ban on phones in schools per se. Would you like to see that?
I think children should not have access to social media. I don't think it's not safeguarding robust. It's just not. It never was intended to be. I think telephones, like an old school brick, where you can make a call saying that you're going to be home in half an hour and be contacted, absolutely. But they're cameras, they're film studios, they're computers, where they're not just phones. And I think that's a bit of a misnomer and leads us into slightly woolly thinking, I think.
Just picking up on one of the points that you mentioned, Stuart, about the kind of role of family and something you talked about, Kay, the role of family and parental responsibility. You'll remember earlier this year there was that series Adolescence, which sparked a lot of conversations about boys and young men. And in the wake of that, there were people talking about a father figure. I guess the question is, you can't create father figures for every family. How do you do that? You can talk about restricting or banning social media, but to that role of family and parental responsibility that both of you have raised, what would you be looking, for example, to the government to do about that?
Well, competitive sport is great for young people and boys. They meet role models in a football team or in other kind of sport, youth club, social club. Some of that has disappeared over the years under both governments. There has been a lack of funding, and local authority funding in particular. And I do think that the civic society will embrace young boys and men to have proper respectful relationships with both each other and girls and women. I mean, for me, I'm a member of the British Transport Police Authority. Only 11% of VORG offences on the network,
being violence against women and
girls, are solved. And I think we need a joined-up approach. We need to use, I know it's not very fashionable to say so, we need to use live facial recognition, because these persistent offenders travelling on the network and assaulting women, you know, we've got to deal with that. So it's a really big societal issue of, you know, how you perceive the relationship between men and women, and how you deal, the second aspect that Jeff Phillips mentioned, how you deal with the perpetrators of these crimes.
Okay, do you have hope that, given the scale of the societal issue, that it's solvable?
Well, I come at it from my own life experience, as I've talked about already this afternoon. I was divorced from my husband when my boy was just a year old, so he was still very much a part of his life, but at the weekends. So my son just had his mum during the week. I made sure that he had male role models around him, either at school or I had male nannies, I had mannies, so that he had that testosterone around him and he knew how to behave. And I also taught him myself how to behave towards women and respect women. If a woman comes in, you stand up, you are polite to women. And I think, you know, personally, I think he's turned out to be quite a well-rounded young man. Aisha knows him, so hopefully she'll back me up on that.
He's done a very excellent job.
There we are.
Very excellent job.
OK, on that note, we've got to move on, but a huge thank you, Michael, for coming in and for talking about the experiences that you've had training professionals on this really important issue. Thank you so much for your time. Now, it is the last programme of the year. 2025 is almost at an end, so we thought it is maybe the opportunity to take a look back at this year and some of the bigger political moments in it. We've made a film, and here it is.
Right now, you're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people.
The warmest of welcomes at Downing Street.
Plenty of solidarity for Ukraine's beleaguered president.
Blimey, 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 the elections.
Reform are going to do very well.
We have replaced the Conservative Party.
Tories were going to do very badly.
The ice cream is melting, just like the Tory vote around here.
Everything that we expected to happen did happen, but it happened on steroids.
The government insisted the course was set on benefit cuts until a wave of opposition from its own MPs.
This is crazy, man. This is outrageous, man.
Protests against asylum seekers in Epping have gone on all summer.
It was an emphatic win for Zach Polanski to make the Green Party bolder and punchier.
Angela Rayner has resigned as Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary.
The man who is Prime Minister and the man who wants to be.
I was asked a direct question and I gave an honest answer.
Someone's definitely been watching too much Celebrity Traitors in Downing Street.
Reading out something that the Chancellor has not yet announced in the House of Commons is mind-blowing.
We are lifting 450,000 children out of poverty with the end of the two-child limit.
If she had any decency, she would resign.
Yeah. Most European nations, they're decaying. They're decaying.
Some of the bigger moments of the year, and blimey, there were some big moments involved. Aisha, what was the biggest for you of 2025?
For me, from a domestic political point of view, I thought the resignation of Angela Rayner was a really, really big moment.
So she was the Deputy Prime Minister and the Housing Secretary, and she had to resign because she hadn't paid the proper tax effectively on a property.
Correct, and obviously somebody who's associated with the Labour Party, but I think people who watch politics in general, in, you know, a bit of a sea of often criticised kind of grey politicians, Angela Rayner was a really interesting political character. She was colourful, she was technicolor politician, a controversial politician, but her background story was incredible, having sort of come from nothing, a teenage mum, to have risen to have become Deputy Prime Minister of the country. But I think the very interesting point of Angela Rayner leaving is sort of what that then meant for the Labour Party and what will she do next. I think it's going to be fascinating.
Do you think she could have a comeback in 2026?
Of course. I think she definitely will have a comeback.
Yeah. Kay, what was your big moment?
I want to take you back to the 28th of February 2025, and I want to take you to the Oval Office, if I may. And I was staggered at the way that Zelensky was spoken to by the president and the VP. They ambushed him. It was shocking behaviour. I was getting ready to go out. I couldn't take my eyes off it on the telly. I was late for dinner watching what was unfolding and criticising him because he didn't have a suit on and he didn't respect the American people. I just thought it was absolutely staggering. And then we've seen what he's been up to again
and
today, the president.
After that moment with that between President Trump and President Zelensky, what we then saw was a sort of rallying round of the European leaders, led in part by Keir Starmer, who put the kind of literal and metaphorical arm around President Zelensky. What do you think that did for Keir Starmer, his response to what happened there?
What did it do for Keir Starmer?
Yeah.
What else was he supposed to do? Of course, that's what he was going to do. And I think probably when they all rallied around him, they thought, there but for the grace of God go I. So, yeah, they were trying to say it's not appropriate. Go on, sorry.
Just really brief on that. I do think Keir Starmer does deserve some credit for what he did after that, because straight after that horrendous showdown, he did gather all of these European leaders in London. I do think that was a big moment. He was the first leader to invite Zelensky straight after that showdown. And, of course, this is much bigger than Keir Starmer, but I think he does deserve credit for that.
Stuart, your standout moment of 2025?
Well, it's got to be the humdinger evisceration of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves by Kemi Badenoch at the budget speech. I mean, I don't know what she'd had 3 shredded wheats for breakfast that day.
Cheerios, something.
Or
she
Cheerios. She had Tiger in her tank. I mean, I hadn't seen her perform to that extent at the dispatch box, but the way she eviscerated both of them for the lack of vision and their U-turns and missteps over the previous year. I mean, it was brilliant and really has given her time and space to try and reconfigure the party as it goes into what will probably be quite a difficult year.
Well, let's on sort of reconfiguring of the Conservative Party and where the other parties sit. We can have a look at the BBC's poll tracker, which shows us on this screen the performance of the parties according to the polls from the very beginning of the year to where we are now. And you can see, really, the kind of standout story is that turquoise blue line at the top, which is Reform UK, who are now topping the polls. Labour starting the year at the top of the polls, but then what seems to be a sort of steady slide down since. And the Conservatives not faring brilliantly better, so now sitting quite a distance behind Reform UK. Aisha, looking at that poll tracker there and knowing, of course, about Keir Starmer's personal popularity ratings according to the polls, which are pretty bleak, do you think that they can pull it back?
Look, I'm not going to sugar the pill. It's a very difficult time for the government at the moment. We just saw the polls there. We saw the local election results. And, of course, all eyes will be on these big elections that are coming in May. But ultimately, this Labour government will be judged in the same way that other governments have been done, at the ballot box, at the general election. And the big issues will be the cost of living. It'll be public services, particularly health, and I think antisocial behaviour, and, of course, immigration. So there's a way to go before then, and I am not denying reality. It's not easy at the moment, but there is still a way to go.
Aisha mentioned there, Kay, the elections. So in May, we've got a really important set of elections. Every set of elections are important, but this one feels like it might be a sort of particular inflection point.
7th of May, yeah.
7th of May, you've got elections to the Senedd in Wales, to Holyrood in Scotland, and then across England. What is your reading of what those election results might mean, particularly for Keir Starmer, given what we've seen in the polls at this point?
Let's also remember there were supposed to be some mayoral elections as well for the first time. But
4 new mayoralties that were postponed.
But they've been postponed. I don't know what Aisha thinks about that and why that was done. Maybe because Reform were likely to win the seat in Essex. I don't know, potentially.
Aisha?
I don't really know either. I think we'll have to defer. But, but I think whether or not those elections happen, there's still going to be a lot of elections that happen.
And Keir Starmer is not looking forward to any of them.
And probably Kemi Badenoch either. Let's not kid ourselves.
I think the only person that's excited about them going forward is Nigel Farage.
And Zach Polanski, actually.
That's true.
I think this is a very important story that we miss. Yes, of course, reform is very important, and we're looking to the right of politics. There's also a lot of movement on the left of politics.
And you could see there in that poll tracker the real uptick for the Green Party, particularly towards the end of the year.
Well, the Greens have doubled.
Polanski's leadership.
Yeah. They've doubled from roughly 8
we can see it on the screen there,
to about 17.
That surge for the Green Party.
Protest vote, in my opinion.
Just for context on the people that might not have followed the postponement of those elections. So these were 4 new mayoralties that were being created in England that were due to have elections in May that have now been postponed. And the government's suggestion is that's because they want to get all the new structures of local government in place before those elections take place. Just case sceptical about that for sure. Right, just on the Conservatives' performance there as well, Stuart. I mean, there has been a very slight uptick towards the end of the year, but the general trajectory for the Conservative Party over the last 12 months has been pretty dismal, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think it has. And in all fairness, the brand was shot to pieces at the general election, and it will take time to repair. Although I think Kemi Badenoch is now running ahead of the Conservative brand. I think all the established parties are struggling.
Interesting. You think Kemi Badenoch is outperforming personally than the broader Conservative Party?
I do now. I mean, it's marginal, but I think she is. I think all parties are going to struggle. I mean, the Liberal Democrats aren't really moving. The Greens are completely economically illiterate and some of the craziest policies, but they are attracting a lot of left of centre voters, as are your party. It's fractured a bit, but potentially. So there is attrition on the left, which is very difficult for Labour because they're only starting off at 34% of the vote at the general election. So if they lose any, they're going to lose hundreds of seats. On the right, of course, the challenge for reform is to basically destroy the Tory party and say, we are the only party that can keep this crazy left-wing coalition out of power at the next general election. So it's going to be very, very interesting.
It's undoubtedly an interesting time in politics. Your party chairman, Kevin Hollinrake, said recently that if it were to come to it, the Conservatives would rather do some sort of electoral coalition with reform than they would with the Liberal Democrats. Do you share that view?
Absolutely. I think it's our national duty, those of us who are right of centre, who believe in our small c Conservative values, that it's absolutely crucial that we prevent a coalition of chaos, which it would be. Because I don't think Labour are likely to hold on to power. They only had 34% of the vote. They're flattered by this huge majority, but I think politics has fundamentally changed in the last 2 or 3 years.
Let's just see. There is a long way to go. And again, I'm not sort of spinning that everything is great, but let's just see, because I remember after the Hartlepool by-election, you know, Boris Johnson was going to have 10 more years in power and Labour was going to be obliterated. Things can change quickly. My quick question to Stuart is, are we going to have a second reform peer?
No, I've been asked this before.
Any sign of defection?
I've been a member of the Tory party since I was 17, and it's sort of family. But that said, you know, I'm someone who believes in a certain set of values, and I want those values to reside in the Conservative Party. If one day it doesn't, then I have no loyalty to that party other than, you know, friendships, which would be bad to break, as Malcolm Offord has found when he defected a couple of weeks ago. But at the moment, no, after 42 years, I intend to stay as a working peer in the Conservative Party.
I think the front page of the FT the other day that was telling us that potentially we would see Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson getting together to one be Prime Minister, one be Deputy Prime Minister come the next election. And they both poo-pooed it at the time. I think watch that space.
OK, so let's just take a look ahead for your predictions. Grab your crystal balls, if you would, for the kind of big things that you're looking out for in 2026. We've already touched upon what's happening in May.
Yeah, the elections for me, I think it will be absolutely a watershed moment for the Prime Minister.
And if you had your crystal ball, do you think that Keir Starmer will still be the leader of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister after those May elections?
After the elections, certainly, but will he be the leader of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister going into whenever the next election might be? I'm not sure.
Stuart, your big moment?
Well, it's niche, but the sadness is the loss of our hereditary peers at the end of this session.
So this is part of the Labour reforms of the House of Lords.
I accept you can't defend the hereditary principle. It was in the manifesto. But frankly, you're essentially kicking out a lot of Conservative-leaning peers and putting in lots of Labour ones as life peers. And if it was in a Central American banana republic, we'd say how awful it was and how undemocratic it was to take your opponents out of the legislature and put your own people in without an election. But that said, There's a lot of accumulated skills, knowledge,
peers that were put in.
wisdom.
I was going to say David Cameron put in a record number.
Starmer has put more peers in the shortest period of time than any Prime Minister.
Let's see over time, Stuart.
And Nick,
David Cameron put in a stack,
and Nick Clegg as well.
Stack of.
So that's very sad.
Very, very quickly
2026.
to look out for, as well as local elections in America. The midterms, I think, are going to be fascinating. Particularly, you know, we've seen New York. There was another mayoral contest just a couple of weeks ago in Miami, which went Democrat as well. So I think it's going to be fascinating.
And just on that point, ever so briefly, let's take a look at this. So we've had this story where President Trump has been putting his own plaques beneath the plaques of the former US presidents in the White House. You can see on your screen there the one that he's done for what he calls Sleepy Joe Biden.
Outrageous. It's outrageous.
Outrageous,
I went into the US the other day for work, and I had to tell them what my social media handles were, because they want to check what you said about the president before whether or not they'll allow you into the country.
One there for Barack Obama, talking. That's Donald Trump's take on Barack Obama, talking about highly ineffective.
I think it's just so sad about how, and I completely accept he was voted in. You know, not one of these people that's pushing back on that. But it's a shame about how he's demeaned that great office of US president. I've just come back from the JFK Library in Boston. Goodness, how times have changed.
Yes, indeed so.
OK, thank you all so much for being with here for the final programme of the year. Great to have you all for.
Merry Christmas.
So that is all for today, and indeed all for this year. Vicky will be back on the 5th of January with the first Politics Live of 2026. So until then, from everyone here, we can wish you a very Merry Christmas and, of course, a Happy New Year. Bye-bye.